My Uncle Richard stood at the head of the mahogany table in my grandmother's dining room, smiled at the 43 relatives packed into that space, and told my 9-year-old daughter Emma she was worthless. Not in those exact words, he was too practiced for that. What he actually said was, "Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go play with the other kids? The adults need to discuss the family business. You wouldn't understand this anyway." Then he turned to me. "Sarah, I appreciate you coming, but let's be honest. You've never contributed anything meaningful to this company. I think it's best if you sit this one out too." Emma didn't cry. She didn't argue. She walked to the front of the room, pulled out her phone, the iPhone 13 I'd given her for her birthday with explicit instructions about its recording app, and played the audio she'd made 3 days earlier when Richard thought she was napping in the guest room. The entire dining room heard his voice, crystal clear through her phone's speaker. "I'm keeping the inheritance for myself, all of it. The $2.8 million from the business sale, the property in Scottsdale, everything. I've already had the lawyers draw up the paperwork. Sarah gets nothing. Her brat gets nothing. They'll never know what hit them." He fell to his knees when his wife Margaret whispered, "You told me we were setting up college funds for all the grandchildren." Her voice broke on the last word. She couldn't finish speaking. Richard's face went from his usual ruddy confidence to the color of old newspaper in approximately 4 seconds. Margaret stood frozen, her wine glass tilted at a dangerous angle. My cousin Jennifer had her hand over her mouth. Uncle Paul had stopped mid-bite, his fork suspended in the air with a piece of prime rib still on it. And I just stood there, perfectly calm, with my daughter's hand in mine, watching my uncle's entire world collapse in front of his children, his wife, his siblings, and every single person who'd spent the last 15 years telling me I'd never amount to anything. Let me tell you how we got here. I was 22 when I started working at Richardson Family Logistics, the trucking company my grandfather built in 1967. It wasn't glamorous. I answered phones, filed paperwork, made coffee for the drivers. My starting salary was $28,000 a year. Richard, who'd taken over as CEO when my grandfather died in 2009, made it clear from day one that I was there as a favor. "Your mother begged me to give you something to do," he said during my first week. "Don't make me regret it." By 2012, I was making $34,000 and handling most of the actual logistics coordination. Richard took credit for every successful contract. When I proposed a new routing system that saved the company $180,000 in fuel costs that year, Richard presented it to the board as his idea. I heard him do it. I was standing outside the conference room door, holding the analysis reports I'd spent 3 months preparing. He never mentioned my name once. March 15, 2013. My mother's birthday dinner at Richard's house in Paradise Valley. He just bought the place, 800 square feet, $890,000. I was sitting at their kitchen island when Richard's son David asked me what I was doing with my career. Before I could answer, Richard jumped in. "Sarah's figuring things out. Not everyone has the head for business, you know. Some people are better suited for support roles." He said it kindly with a smile, like he was doing me a favor by lowering expectations. I smiled back and said, "You're probably right, Uncle Richard." What I didn't tell him, I'd been accepted to Arizona State's MBA program 2 weeks earlier. Full scholarship. I'd start in the fall. David nodded sympathetically and changed the subject. October 3, 2014. The family meeting where Richard announced he was expanding the business into cold storage logistics. "This is the future," he told everyone. "We're going to triple our revenue in 5 years." He had charts, projections, a whole presentation. What he didn't have was any actual experience in temperature-controlled transport. I'd been researching it for 6 months. I knew the regulations, the equipment costs, the insurance requirements. I knew his numbers were wrong. During the Q&A, I started to point out an error in his refrigeration cost projections. Richard cut me off. "Sarah, this is complicated stuff. Let the people who understand the industry handle it, okay?" My father nodded in agreement. My mother patted my hand. I shut up. The expansion failed 18 months later, cost the company $420,000. June 2015. I finished my MBA. Richard didn't come to graduation. Neither did my parents. They were at David's boat christening in San Diego. David had just bought a 32-foot Sea Ray with money from his first big commission check at the family company. I took myself to dinner at Postino, spent $47 on wine and bruschetta, and decided something that night. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, just that the next morning, I started making calls. I'd been quietly taking on freelance logistics consulting jobs since my second year of grad school. Nothing that competed with Richardson, small businesses, startups, a couple of e-commerce companies that needed help optimizing their supply chains. I was good at it, really good. By July 2015, I had 8 regular clients and was pulling in an extra $3,200 a month on top of my $41,000 salary at Richardson. I registered an LLC on July 18, 2015. Phoenix Business Solutions. Cost me $85 in filing fees. Richard never knew. September 2015. Richard announced at Sunday dinner that he was cutting my position at Richardson. "We need to trim some fat," he explained, not quite looking at me. "Nothing personal, Sarah. You understand?" I was holding Emma. She was 3 years old then, barely talking in full sentences. I nodded, thanked him for the opportunity, and left with my severance check for $4,200. My mother called me that night. "Maybe this is a blessing," she said. "You can focus on being a mom now. That's what's really important." I agreed with her. Hung up. Cashed the check the next day and put every dollar into Phoenix Business Solutions. By December 2015, I had 14 clients. Monthly revenue, $8,900. I worked from my apartment in Tempe, 950 square feet, $875 a month rent. Emma went to daycare while I optimized shipping routes and negotiated carrier contracts. I didn't tell my family any of this. When my mother asked what I was doing for money, I told her I was picking up some administrative work here and there. She seemed relieved I wasn't asking for help. March 2016, family Easter dinner. Richard's backyard, catered by some place in Scottsdale that charged $85 a head. David cornered me by the pool. "Dad feels bad about letting you go," he said. "But honestly, Sarah, you weren't really cut out for the logistics business anyway. It takes a certain kind of mind." I sipped my water. I'd stopped drinking at family events, needed to stay sharp, and asked him what he thought it took. "Vision," he said. "Strategic thinking, the ability to see the big picture." I nodded. "You're probably right," I said. I didn't mention that I'd just signed a contract with a mid-sized furniture retailer to manage their entire distribution network. $180,000 annual contract. My biggest yet. David smiled, clearly pleased he'd made his point, and walked away. I didn't know that same week, Richard was meeting with a business broker about selling Richardson Family Logistics. The company was worth approximately $3.2 million according to the preliminary assessment. He was already planning how to structure the sale to maximize his personal take. By June 2016, Phoenix Business Solutions had 22 clients and was generating $19,400 in monthly revenue. I hired my first employee, Marcus, a logistics coordinator with 7 years of experience who'd been laid off from a bigger firm. Paid him $52,000 a year plus benefits. I was making $232,800 annually at that point. I bought a condo in Chandler, 400 square feet, $285,000, paid 20% down, and told my family I was renting from a friend who'd moved for work. My mother seemed concerned I wasn't being more frugal. "Single mothers need to be careful with money," she warned me. I thanked her for the advice. November 2016. Thanksgiving at Richard's house. His wife Margaret pulled me aside in the kitchen. "I worry about you, Sarah," she said, arranging rolls in a basket. "No husband, raising Emma alone, barely making ends meet. If you ever need anything." She trailed off meaningfully. I could see the pity in her eyes. It was genuine. She actually felt bad for me. "I'm doing okay," I told her. "We have everything we need." She patted my shoulder. "That's what your mother said you'd say. You're so proud, but pride doesn't pay the bills." I smiled and excused myself. I just deposited a $45,000 commission check that morning. Emma and I left early. Stopped at Target on the way home, and I let her pick out any toy she wanted. She chose a $12.99 stuffed elephant. Named it Lucky. I had close calls, so many close calls. February 2017. My mother dropped by my condo unannounced. I'd been on a video conference with a client in Atlanta, my home office door closed, discussing a $310,000 expansion of their distribution network. I heard the doorbell, saw my mother's car through the window, and ended the call mid-sentence. Apologized and rescheduled for later. Shoved all my paperwork into a drawer, minimized the spreadsheets on my computer, and answered the door in yoga pants I'd thrown on specifically to look like I'd been doing nothing important. "Just wanted to see how you were," my mother said, looking around like she was assessing the situation. "This place is nice. Your friend must be giving you a good deal on rent." I nodded, made her coffee. Talked about Emma's preschool for 30 minutes while my phone buzzed with increasingly urgent texts from my Atlanta client. The room got quieter every time my phone vibrated. My mother finally left at 2:47 p.m. I locked the door behind her and leaned against it for a full minute before calling Atlanta back. July 2017, Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Richard was holding court about some industry conference he'd attended in Dallas. The keynote speaker was talking about emerging logistics tech, he said. AI optimization, predictive routing, all that Silicon Valley nonsense. I told him the trucking business is about relationships and experience, not algorithms. I was eating my mother's pot roast and thinking about the AI-powered routing system I just implemented for 3 of my clients. It had reduced their delivery times by 18% and saved them a combined $97,000 in the first quarter alone. "You're probably right, Uncle Richard," I said. He nodded, satisfied. I noticed my father had stopped eating and was watching me with an odd expression. For a second, I thought he knew something. Then he asked me to pass the bread and the moment passed. September 2017, the family reunion at my grandmother's place in Fountain Hills, the same house where years later Richard would make his announcement about my daughter. My cousin Jennifer asked what I was doing for work these days. Before I could answer, Richard's voice carried across the patio. "Sarah's doing some part-time work from home, administrative stuff. Lets her be there for Emma." Jennifer nodded sympathetically. "That must be hard," she said. "Making it work on so little income, you're so strong." I thanked her. Excused myself to check on Emma. In the bathroom, I checked my phone. 3 new client inquiries through my website. Phoenix Business Solutions now had 31 clients, 7 employees, and annual revenue of $847,000. I was incorporating as an S-corp the following week to handle the tax implications. I flushed the toilet for effect, washed my hands, and went back outside. December 2017. Richard announced at the family Christmas party that Richardson Family Logistics had been acquired by a regional carrier for $2.9 million. He was keeping most of the money, compensation for my years of leadership, he explained. He was setting up trust funds for his own kids, buying Margaret a vacation home in Sedona, taking care of family the right way. He looked directly at me when he said that last part. "Some people build legacies," he said. "Others just coast along." My mother squeezed my hand under the table. Supportive, pitying, I smiled at Richard and congratulated him. The turkey on my plate had gone cold. I didn't know that Richard had actually told my grandmother, who'd been diagnosed with advanced dementia and was in a care facility, that he was going to distribute portions of the sale proceeds to all her grandchildren equally. He'd never intended to follow through. My grandmother passed away 4 months later, never knowing he'd lied to her. By March 2018, Phoenix Business Solutions was operating with 12 full-time employees and generating $1.4 million in annual revenue. I'd moved my office to a proper commercial space in Phoenix, 200 square feet, $3,200 a month. I drove a 2016 Honda Civic I'd paid cash for, nothing flashy, nothing that would make my family ask questions. I dressed for family events in Target clearance rack clothes. I kept Emma in the same public school, though I could have afforded private. The secret was getting heavier, but I knew I'd need it. Some part of me understood that this wasn't just about building a business anymore. It was about having something they couldn't take from me, something they couldn't diminish or explain away. April 2018. Sunday brunch at Richard's new Scottsdale place, the second house, 5,400 square feet, $1.3 million. He walked me around the property, pointing out the pool, the outdoor kitchen, the home theater. "This is what success looks like, Sarah," he said, not meanly. Almost kindly, like he was trying to help me understand something. "It comes from taking risks, making bold moves, being willing to lead." I asked him what he thought held people back from success. "Fear," he said immediately. "Lack of vision. Some people just aren't wired for it." I nodded slowly. "That makes sense," I said. I didn't tell him that I'd just signed a lease on a second office location, or that I was in negotiations with a Fortune 500 company to manage their Southwest distribution operations. The deal would be worth $920,000 over 2 years. We walked back inside. Margaret had made mimosas. I didn't have one. By September 2018, I had 19 employees. Annual revenue was projected to hit $2.1 million. I bought a house in Gilbert, 800 square feet, 4 bedrooms, $465,000. Told my family I was house sitting for a friend who'd taken a 2-year job overseas. My mother asked why anyone would leave such a nice house empty. She's worried about renters, I said. Wants someone she trusts looking after it. My mother found that reasonable. Emma started first grade. I hired an attorney, Maria Chen, from a firm in downtown Phoenix to help me start structuring things properly. Business entity optimization, asset protection, succession planning. You're building something significant, Maria told me during our first meeting. We need to make sure it's protected. I paid her firm $8,500 in retainer fees. Best money I ever spent. The close calls kept coming. November 2018. Thanksgiving, Richard's house again. I was helping Margaret set the table when David walked into the dining room with a woman I didn't recognize. "This is Alicia," he said. "She's a logistics consultant." My stomach dropped. Alicia smiled at me. "What do you do?" she asked, making conversation. Before I could answer, David jumped in. "Sarah used to work for our family business. She's taking some time to focus on her daughter now." Alicia nodded. I set down the silverware carefully. My hands had stopped shaking. I'd learned to control that. "I do some consulting work part-time," I said casually. "Nothing major." "Small businesses, mostly." Alicia's eyes lit up. "Oh, what kind of consulting?" The room temperature seemed to drop. Richard had walked in, was listening. "Just basic operations stuff," I said, "helping people get organized." Alicia started to ask another question. Richard interrupted. "Sarah's being modest. She's very good at administrative work, very detail-oriented." He said it approvingly, sincerely. Alicia smiled and moved on to another topic. I excused myself to check on Emma. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall and counted to 20. That was close. Too close. January 2019. Richard called me. This almost never happened. "I have a proposition for you," he said. His voice had that careful tone he used when he thought he was being generous. "I'm involved with a new venture, commercial real estate development. I could use someone to help with paperwork, scheduling, that sort of thing. 20 hours a week, $18 an hour. Thought of you." I was sitting in my office, looking at a spreadsheet showing Phoenix Business Solutions Q4 2018 performance. Revenue, $627,000. Profit margin, 34%. I had offers from 3 new clients on my desk, combined value $1.2 million annually. "That's really kind of you, Uncle Richard," I said. "Can I think about it?" He sighed. "Sure, but don't take too long. These opportunities don't stay open forever." I told him I'd let him know by the end of the week. I never called him back. He never asked again. I think he assumed I'd been too embarrassed to say yes or too proud to accept help. But then March 3rd, 2019, everything shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. I was at a logistics industry conference in San Diego. Phoenix Business Solutions was exhibiting for the first time, $4, $200 for the booth space, another $2,800 for materials. I'd brought Marcus and 2 of my senior coordinators. We were showcasing our AI routing system, the one Richard had called Silicon Valley nonsense. A man in an expensive suit stopped at our booth. Tall, late 50s, the kind of presence that makes people pay attention. He studied our display for 3 minutes without saying anything. Then he handed me his card. "James Richardson," it read. "Richardson Family Logistics founder and former CEO, my grandfather. Except it wasn't my grandfather, he'd been dead for 10 years. This was my grandfather's younger brother, James, the one who'd sold his share of the business back in 1983 and moved to Seattle. The one the family didn't talk about much. The one who disagreed with how my grandfather ran things and had left rather than fight about it. "You're Sarah," he said, not a question. "Michael's granddaughter." I nodded carefully. He smiled, a real smile, warm at the edges. "I've been keeping an eye on Phoenix Business Solutions. Very impressive work." He paused. "You know your Uncle Richard sold the family company last year." "I heard," I said. "Did you hear what he paid himself from the sale?" "Or what he told your grandmother, about taking care of all her grandchildren?" "I hadn't. He told me everything." Richard had promised my grandmother, in writing, that each grandchild would receive $100,000 from the sale proceeds. There were 7 grandchildren total. That should have been $700,000 set aside. Richard had set aside exactly $0. He'd told my grandmother he'd handle it after the sale closed. Then he'd had the lawyers structure everything to flow directly to him. My grandmother had signed documents she couldn't understand anymore, trusting her oldest son to do right by the family. James Richardson handed me a folder. Copies of the original promises, correspondence, your grandmother's signature on the understanding that this was how it would work. He looked at me steadily. I'm too old to fight my nephew about this, but I thought you should know what kind of man is running that family now. I took the folder, didn't open it, not yet. Why tell me? Because you're the only one who's built something without them, he said, and because I have a feeling you'll know what to do with this information when the time is right. The conference ended. I flew back to Phoenix with that folder in my laptop bag. I showed it to Maria Chen the next day. She read through it slowly, made notes, looked up at me. This is actionable, she said. If Richard represented to your grandmother that grandchildren would receive distributions, and he had her sign documents under that understanding, there's a potential claim here. She paused. Of course, proving your grandmother's mental state at the time of signing, proving what Richard actually told her versus what the documents say, that's complicated. Expensive. Could take years. What if I just want to keep it for now? I asked, in case I need it later. Maria nodded. That's actually the smart play. Information is leverage. Use it when it matters most. I put the folder in my safe at home. The same safe where I was keeping the articles of incorporation for Phoenix Business Solutions, the deed to my house, Emma's birth certificate, and every piece of documentation of my business's growth. I didn't know yet how I'd use what James had given me. I just knew I'd need it eventually. By June 2019, Phoenix Business Solutions had 24 employees and was generating $2.8 million in annual revenue. I'd outgrown the Phoenix office and opened a second location in Tucson. I was managing supply chains for 17 major clients, including 2 Fortune 500 companies. I was making more money than Richard had ever made as CEO of Richardson Family Logistics. I drove to family dinners in my Honda Civic, wore my Target clothes, listened to Richard talk about his real estate ventures and his investment portfolio, and smiled and nodded in all the right places. September 2019. Labor Day at my parents' house. Richard's son David announced his engagement. Big celebration, champagne, his fiancée's parents were there. Richard stood up to make a toast. David is building the kind of life every father hopes for, he said. Success in business, a beautiful woman who loves him, a bright future. He understands what it takes to win in this world. He glanced at me, not unkindly. Not everyone has that drive, and that's okay. The world needs all kinds. I raised my glass of water, drank, said nothing. David's fiancée was nice. She asked me about Emma, about what grade she was in. I told her 3rd grade, doing great, loved reading. The fiancée seemed genuinely interested. It must be hard, she said sympathetically. Raising her on your own, you're doing such a good job with what you have. I thanked her, meant it. She had no idea what I had. By December 2019, I had 32 employees. Annual revenue, $3.4 million. I'd incorporated in Delaware for better corporate protection. I'd set up a proper retirement plan for my employees, 401(k) matching, profit sharing, the whole structure. I paid my people well. Marcus was making $89,000 a year now. My newest senior coordinator, Patricia, started at $71,000. I'd bought a building in Tempe to house our headquarters, 200 square feet, $1.2 million. Took out a commercial mortgage, paid 30% down. Didn't tell my family I'd stopped renting office space. When my mother asked about work, I told her consulting was going fine, staying busy. She seemed pleased I'd found something steady. The thing about building something in secret is that it changes you. Every family dinner where they underestimated me, every sympathetic look, every piece of advice about being practical or realistic, it all went into an account I was keeping. Not anger exactly, more like evidence, proof that they'd never really seen me. And the bigger Phoenix Business Solutions got, the more I realized I didn't need them to see me. I just needed to be ready for the moment when they couldn't avoid seeing me anymore. That moment was coming. I could feel it. I didn't know that same month, December 2019, Richard was starting to have financial problems. His real estate ventures weren't performing the way he'd projected. He'd borrowed against the Scottsdale house. Margaret didn't know. The vacation home in Sedona was mortgaged too. He needed cash, and he was starting to think about the $700,000 he'd promised his mother would go to her grandchildren. Money he'd never actually set aside. Money he'd spent on houses and investments and David's engagement party. He was starting to wonder if anyone would ever notice, if his mother, gone now for almost 2 years, had told anyone else about that promise. He was starting to hope nobody would ask questions. Then came 2020. The pandemic hit. Logistics went insane. Supply chains collapsed and rebuilt overnight. Half the industry couldn't adapt. Phoenix Business Solutions thrived. E-commerce was exploding, and I'd spent 5 years building exactly the kind of flexible, tech-forward operation that companies desperately needed. By June 2020, I had clients begging for capacity. By September, I had 47 employees, and revenue was tracking toward $5.2 million for the year. I bought another building in Phoenix, leased warehouse space in 3 cities, brought in a COO because I couldn't manage the growth alone anymore. Her name was Diana Chen, no relation to my attorney, and she came from FedEx with 20 years of experience. I paid her $165,000 a year plus equity. Family dinners happened over Zoom. Richard held forth about how the pandemic was destroying businesses, how grateful he was to be out of logistics, how he'd timed the sale of Richardson perfectly. "Sarah, how are you holding up?" he asked during one call. "I know these times must be especially hard for people in uncertain situations." My mother nodded sympathetically in her little Zoom square. I told him we were managing, staying safe, grateful to have a roof over our heads. He looked relieved that I wasn't asking for help. Phoenix Business Solutions hit $6.1 million in revenue for 2020. I gave every employee a bonus. Marcus got $12,000. Patricia got $9,500. I bought a second house, investment property, rental income, $380,000 in Mesa. Paid cash. My accountant, a CPA named Robert Price from a firm in Scottsdale, told me I was building serious wealth. "Your net worth is approaching 8 figures, he said during our year-end planning meeting. "You need to start thinking about estate planning, asset protection, long-term strategy." I hired a financial advisor, set up trusts, structured everything properly. Emma was 8 years old. She'd never want for anything. February 2021. The family had in-person gatherings again. First one back was at Richard's Scottsdale house. Margaret had remodeled the kitchen $140,000, she told everyone proudly. Richard barbecued steaks on his new $8,000 grill. David was there with his wife, talking about the house they were buying in Paradise Valley, $1.1 million. Richard was helping with the down payment. My cousin Jennifer had just made partner at her law firm. Uncle Paul's daughter was engaged to a doctor. Everyone was doing well, moving up, building those legacies Richard talked about. I sat in a deck chair in my old Navy sundress, $19.99 on clearance, and ate a hot dog while they had ribeyes. Nobody thought twice about it. Margaret offered to make me a steak. "We have plenty," she said kindly. I told her the hot dog was perfect, thanks anyway. She patted my shoulder. I was wearing a Timex watch that cost $34.95. I owned a Rolex Datejust I'd bought myself for $13,500 when Phoenix Business Solutions hit $5 million in revenue. It was in my safe at home. I'd never worn it anywhere my family might see. March 2021. Richard called me again. Different tone this time, more careful. "Sarah, I've been thinking, you must have learned a lot during your time at Richardson, even if it was mostly administrative work. I'm mentoring a young entrepreneur who's starting a logistics company. Small operation, just getting off the ground. I thought maybe you could talk to him, share some of what you learned." "He can't pay much, maybe $25 an hour for some consulting time." I was in my office. Through the glass wall, I could see Diana running a staff meeting. 47 people in that room, all working for the company I'd built. My revenue for Q1 2021 was already at $1.8 million. "That's really thoughtful of you, Uncle Richard," I said, "but I'm pretty busy right now. Maybe in a few months," he sighed. "Sarah, I'm trying to help you. These opportunities to build connections, to get your foot in the door, you can't keep passing them up. Pride isn't a career strategy." I thanked him for thinking of me, told him I'd keep it in mind, hung up, stared at the phone for 30 seconds, then I went back to work. By December 2021, Phoenix Business Solutions had 62 employees and hit $8.3 million in annual revenue. I was getting acquisition offers. A national logistics firm wanted to buy me out for $12 million. I said no. I wasn't building this to sell. I was building it because every time Richard told me I didn't have vision, every time David looked at me with pity, every time my mother asked if I was managing okay financially, I got to know something they didn't. And that knowledge felt better than any amount of money. But I was also getting tired of hiding. The weight of the secret was different now. Heavier. Not because I wanted their approval anymore, but because maintaining the lie required so much energy. Every family event meant choosing the right clothes, driving the right car, telling the right version of my life. Emma was 9 years old and smart enough to start asking questions. "Mom, why don't we tell Grandma about our real house?" she asked one night. "Why do you always say you're borrowing it?" I didn't have a good answer that made sense to a 9-year-old. "Sometimes," I told her, "people can't see what's right in front of them until you show them at exactly the right moment." She thought about that. "It's the right moment?" she asked. "I'll know when it happens," I said. Then yesterday, no, not yesterday, let me get the timeline right. Then April 2022, Richard called a family meeting. His voice on the phone was different, strained. "I need everyone at Mom's house on Saturday," he said. "1 p.m., it's important, don't be late." My mother called me after to see if I knew what it was about. I didn't, but I had a feeling. That folder from James Richardson was still in my safe. I pulled it out that night, read through it again. Looked at my grandmother's signature on the documents promising equal distribution to grandchildren. Looked at the correspondence showing Richard knew exactly what he'd promised. Maria Chen had told me 2 years ago this was leverage. Maybe it was time. Saturday, April 16th, 2022. I dressed in my usual family event clothes. Jeans from Target, a plain blue shirt, the Timex watch. I drove the Honda Civic to my grandmother's house in Fountain Hills, the house that had been empty since she died, that Richard maintained because he kept saying he couldn't bear to sell it yet. The house was worth $680,000. Richard had mentioned selling it and splitting the proceeds among the family. That discussion had been happening for 3 years. Nothing ever came of it. I walked in at 12:58 p.m. 43 people were there. The entire extended family. Richard had positioned himself at the head of the dining room table, the mahogany one my grandmother had bought in 1974. He looked tired, older than his 62 years. Margaret sat to his right, looking nervous. David was there, his wife beside him. Jennifer, Uncle Paul, my parents, cousins I barely knew. And Emma, sitting quietly next to my mother, holding Lucky the elephant she'd gotten at Target 6 years ago. Richard waited until 1:15 to make sure everyone had arrived. Then he stood up. The room got quieter. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I wanted to gather the family to discuss some important matters regarding Mom's estate and the distribution of family assets." He paused, looked around the room. "As you all know, I've been managing the family finances since Dad passed and after we sold Richardson Family Logistics. It's been a privilege to serve the family in this capacity." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "However, I've given this a lot of thought, and I've realized that the best way to preserve what Dad and Mom built is to consolidate the assets under more focused management. After consulting with attorneys and financial advisors, I've decided that the proceeds from the sale of Richardson Family Logistics, approximately $2.8 million after taxes and fees, should remain under my stewardship to ensure long-term family stability." My mother looked confused. Uncle Paul frowned. Margaret's face was perfectly blank. Richard continued, "I know Mom talked about wanting to take care of all her grandchildren, and we will, of course, but the most responsible way to do that is through trust distributions that I'll manage according to need and circumstance, rather than direct payments that might not be in everyone's best interest." He looked at me, actually made eye contact. "Some family members are in better positions than others to manage significant sums. I think we all understand that." Nobody spoke. The silence lasted long enough that I heard someone's phone buzz in another room. Then Richard smiled, that same kind smile he'd used when telling me I wasn't cut out for the business. "I hope everyone understands this is what's best for the family. Now, Margaret made her famous lasagna, so let's—" "Uncle Richard," I said, my voice was calm, quieter than his had been. "Can I ask a question before we eat?" He looked surprised that I'd spoken. "Of course, Sarah." "Did Grandma ever put anything in writing about wanting to take care of her grandchildren?" His face didn't change. We had many conversations about her wishes, but nothing formal. Nothing at all. Nothing that would override sound financial management, he said, still kind, still patient. Sarah, I know this might seem unfair, but trust me, this is what's best for everyone. I nodded slowly, reached into my bag, a canvas tote from Trader Joe's, $3.99, and pulled out a folder. Set it on the table. So this letter from Grandma to her attorney, dated October 2017, saying that each grandchild should receive $100,000 from the sale of the family business. That's not formal enough. Richard's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Or this email exchange between you and Grandma's estate attorney, where you confirmed you'd handle the grandchildren's distributions as discussed. That's not formal. I pulled out another document. Or this letter from James Richardson, Dad's brother James, the one nobody talks about, confirming that he witnessed you promising Grandma, in person, that you'd make sure all 7 grandchildren were taken care of equally. The room was dead silent now. Margaret had put down her wine glass. My mother's hand was over her mouth. Uncle Paul had leaned forward. Richard was staring at the documents on the table like they were weapons, which I suppose they were. Where did you get those? He whispered. James gave them to me, I said. 3 years ago, at a conference in San Diego. I paused. At the Logistics Industry Conference where Phoenix Business Solutions was exhibiting. Richard blinked. Phoenix Business what? And that's when I told them. Not everything at once. I wasn't kind about it exactly, but I wasn't cruel either. I was strategic. I told them about the MBA, about starting the consulting business in 2015, about the LLC, the clients, the steady growth, about the $847,000 in revenue the year Richard fired me from Richardson Family Logistics, about hitting $1 million in annual revenue while they worried about me making ends meet, about the employees, 62 of them now, and the headquarters building I owned in Tempe, about the $8.3 million in revenue last year, about the acquisition offers I'd turned down, about the house in Gilbert that wasn't borrowed, the investment property in Mesa, the net worth my accountant said was approaching 8 figures. I told them while looking at Richard's face, watched it go from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like physical pain. David actually stood up like he was going to leave or maybe check if I was lying. No, Diana wasn't there. This was just family. David sat back down. My mother was crying. I couldn't tell if it was pride or shock or something else entirely. The consulting work you mentioned, my father said finally. That was all of this. Yes, I said. The part-time administrative jobs, Richard said. His voice sounded strange, hoarse. When I offered you work, when David asked what you did, you were running a multi-million-dollar company. Yes. Why didn't you tell us? It was a fair question. I'd asked myself the same thing 1,000 times. Because, I said slowly, every time I tried to contribute something at Richardson, every time I had an idea or spotted a problem, I was told I didn't understand, that I wasn't cut out for it, that some people just don't have the vision. I looked at him steadily. So I stopped trying to make you see me. I built something you couldn't ignore instead. Margaret whispered something to Richard. He shook his head. She whispered again, more urgently. He put his hand up, the same gesture he'd used to silence me 100 times. She pushed his hand away, stood up, looked at me. The grandchildren's money, she said. The $700,000, where is it? Richard didn't answer. Margaret turned to him. Richard, where is the money you promised your mother would go to the grandchildren? I used it for investments, he said, for the family's long-term benefit. Which investments? The real estate, the portfolio, our houses, Margaret said flatly. You used your mother's grandchildren's inheritance to buy our houses. To build generational wealth, Richard protested. To lie to your mother on her deathbed, Margaret said. Her voice was shaking. To look at Sarah and her daughter and your brother's kids and promise them something you'd already spent. Emma, I'd almost forgotten Emma was there, stood up. My 9-year-old daughter with her stuffed elephant, in her Target clothes that matched mine, walked to the front of the room. She looked at Richard. Mr. Richard, she said, you said I was worthless, that I wouldn't understand grown-up business. Emma, I didn't mean. She pulled out her phone, the iPhone 13 I'd given her for her birthday with explicit instructions about its recording app, about how sometimes the truth needs to be documented. I recorded something 3 days ago, she said. When you were in Grandma's guest room talking on the phone, you thought I was napping. I wasn't. She pressed play. The audio quality was perfect, better than I'd expected. Richard's voice filled the dining room. I'm keeping the inheritance for myself, all of it. The $2.8 million from the business sale, the property in Scottsdale, everything. I've already had the lawyers draw up the paperwork. Sarah gets nothing, her brat gets nothing, they'll never know what hit them. Then another voice, I recognized it after a second as Richard's attorney, Frank something, the lawyer he'd used for the sale of Richardson Logistics. Richard, if anyone finds out you promised your mother those distributions. Who's going to find out? She's dead. James is in Seattle, doesn't talk to the family. And Sarah, Richard laughed, it was an ugly sound. Sarah can barely keep herself together. She's no threat. None of them are threats. Emma stopped the recording. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silence. This one had weight, texture. Uncle Paul stood up and walked out, just left. Jennifer, the lawyer, was typing something into her phone. My mother was sobbing openly now. David looked like he'd been punched. And Margaret sat back down in her chair with the careful movements of someone who just realized their entire life was different from what they'd thought it was. Richard fell to his knees. Actually dropped to the floor like his legs had stopped working. Margaret, he said, I can explain. The money I was planning to. You told me, Margaret whispered, that we were setting up college funds for all the grandchildren. That's what you said the money was for, college funds and trust distributions. She stood up, picked up her purse, looked at David. Get your things. We're leaving. Mom, where are we? We're going to your sister's house. Now. She walked past Richard without looking at him. David followed, his wife trailing behind looking shell-shocked. Other family members started moving. The room was emptying. My parents stood frozen, looking at me like they'd never seen me before. My mother finally spoke. Sarah, why didn't you tell us? About the business, about what you'd built, about. Would you have believed me? I asked. Not cruelly, just honestly. If I told you 7 years ago that I was starting a logistics company, that I was going to build something bigger than Richardson ever was, would you have believed me? She didn't answer, didn't need to, we both knew the truth. My father put his hand on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. I should have said that a long time ago, I should have seen. He trailed off, shook his head. They left. Jennifer left, Uncle Paul's family left. Within 20 minutes, the house was empty except for me, Emma, and Richard, still on his knees in front of the mahogany table. I can fix this, he said. To me, to the empty room, to himself, I couldn't tell. I can liquidate assets, I can make the distributions, I can. You can't, I said, because even if you sell everything you own, you've spent or leveraged most of it. The Scottsdale house is mortgaged, the Sedona place too. Your investment portfolio is down because you're not actually that good at financial management, you just got lucky once with timing a sale. I pulled out another document from my folder. This is a forensic accounting analysis my attorney commissioned. Of your assets, your debt, your actual current net worth. You're leveraged at about 72%. You couldn't come up with $700,000 if you wanted to, not without declaring bankruptcy. His face went from pale to red to pale again in 10 seconds. How long have you known? About the grandchildren's inheritance, 3 years, about your financial situation, about 6 months. Maria Chen, my attorney, has very good investigators on retainer. Why didn't you expose me earlier? Because, I said, I needed you to do it yourself, to get so comfortable in your lies that you'd say it out loud where it could be recorded, to demonstrate in front of the entire family exactly who you are. I picked up my folder, took Emma's hand. The house, Grandma's house that you've been unable to sell, is worth $680,000. I'll buy it from the estate at fair market value. That's not enough to make the grandchildren whole, but I'll make up the difference from my own funds. $700,000 total, divided equally among the 7 grandchildren. $100,000 each, just like Grandma wanted. I paused. Except my portion, I don't need it. That $100,000 will go to a scholarship fund in Grandma's name. For first-generation college students studying business. Richard was crying now, actual tears running down his face. I'm sorry, he said. Sarah, I'm so sorry, I never meant. Yes, you did, I said, not angry, just factual. You meant every word. Every dismissal, every assumption, every time you looked at me and saw someone who didn't matter, you meant all of it. The only thing you didn't mean was getting caught. Emma and I walked to the door. My daughter looked back at Richard one more time. "I'm not worthless," she said, "and neither is my mom." We left him there, crying in his dead mother's house, surrounded by documents proving everything he'd tried to hide. The settlement took 4 months to finalize. Richard sold the Scottsdale house at a loss, sold the Sedona place, liquidated most of his investment portfolio. He managed to come up with $340,000. I provided the remaining $360,000 from Phoenix Business Solutions. Each grandchild received their $100,000 distribution in August 2022. My portion went to the scholarship fund. Emma's portion went into a trust for her college education and beyond. Richard and Margaret divorced that September. She got the house they'd bought together in Paradise Valley, the one that wasn't heavily mortgaged. He got to keep his car and about $50,000 in remaining assets. He moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Mesa. Last I heard, he was working as a consultant for a small logistics firm, making about $60,000 a year. David didn't speak to him for over a year. My parents struggled with it. They wanted to be loyal to family, but they couldn't unsee what they'd seen, unhear what they'd heard. We have Sunday dinners now, just the 4 of us plus Emma. My mother asks about the business. Actually listens when I talk about clients and contracts and growth strategies. My father told me last month that he wishes he'd stood up for me more at Richardson. "I thought Richard knew what he was doing," he said. "I thought you were better off in support roles where you wouldn't face as much pressure." I was wrong. Phoenix Business Solutions hit $11.2 million in revenue in 2022. I hired 12 more employees, opened an office in Denver, and started preliminary discussions about a possible IPO in 3 to 5 years. Diana thinks we could be looking at a company valuation of $40.50 million if we continue on current trajectory. Emma is in 5th grade now. She wants to be a business owner when she grows up, or maybe a lawyer, or maybe both. Like you and Aunt Maria, she says, she still has Lucky the elephant on her bed. For 3 months, everything was stable. Quiet, resolved. The family gatherings were smaller now, fewer people, less pretense. Richard wasn't invited. His name came up occasionally, usually when someone needed to process what had happened. Jennifer told me she'd always suspected something was off about the way Richard handled family finances, but she'd never investigated because she didn't want to cause problems. Uncle Paul said he felt guilty for not questioning things more. "I just assumed," he said, "that Richard knew what he was doing, that he had everyone's best interests at heart." The past tense in that sentence said everything. Then last week, my lawyer called. Maria's voice had that carefully neutral tone she uses when something significant is happening. "Sarah, Richard has filed a motion challenging the settlement agreement. He's claiming the grandchildren's distributions were completed under duress, that the forensic accounting was inaccurate, and that the recording Emma made was obtained illegally under Arizona's wiretapping laws." She paused. "He's also claiming you coerced him into accepting terms that were financially devastating, and that he signed the settlement under extreme emotional distress." I hung up, walked to my home office, opened the safe where I keep important documents, pulled out something I'd been holding onto for exactly this moment, a second recording from the day before the family meeting. The day Richard had called me and said, "Sarah, I need you to know something before Saturday. I'm doing what's best for the family, and if you try to interfere, I'll make sure everyone knows you've been lying to them for years about your situation. I'll tell them you're a fraud, that your business is probably failing, that you're just bitter because you couldn't cut it at Richardson." I'd recorded that call with his full knowledge. I'd told him at the start of the conversation that I was recording, as required by Arizona law. He'd said he didn't care. Told me to record whatever I wanted because truth is on my side. I called Maria back. "Come to my office tomorrow," I said. "I have something you need to hear." So, what do you think? Did Richard go too far, or was Sarah justified? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more family drama stories.